There is a category of evil that operates most effectively through its apparent opposite. The innkeeper who turns travelers away is suspicious. The innkeeper who welcomes them, who is warm and competent and reassuring, and who provides exactly what the road requires is not. Ezra Dill on the Big Sandy River was pleasant to the point of studied harmlessness. The Denton family on the Laurel County Road managed their guests with professional hospitality. Hester Moody at the Doe River crossing in Carter County, Tennessee, operated at a different register from both of them, not the practiced pleasantness of a man managing an information extraction system, and not the patient leverage of a family with a 16-year plan, but something that the women who stopped at her inn in the 1890s described in their subsequent accounts in language that consistently pointed at the same element. She made you feel safe, not just comfortable. Safe, the particular, deep safety of a woman who has been taken care of by someone who understood exactly what she needed before she said it. For the women who traveled the Carter County Road through the Doe River Gap in the 1890s, that was the thing Hester Moody offered that no other inn on the route could match. For some of them, it was the last thing they were offered. Hester Moody was 60 years old in 1898 when the circuit court proceeding that ended her innkeeping career produced its sealed findings. She had been at the Doe River crossing inn since 1881, 17 years, and in that time she had built a reputation as the finest host on the mountain road between Elizabethton and the North Carolina line. Her inn was clean, her food was good, her manner was warm, and she had a specific skill, which multiple witnesses described in the circuit court testimony, and which the sealed exhibit bundle addresses in the specific terms the open testimony only approached, of recognizing which of her female guests were traveling in circumstances that were not entirely voluntary, or not entirely safe, or not entirely known to the people they had left behind. Before we begin, drop your location in the comments and tell me what time it is where you are. Hester Moody ran her inn at the Doe River crossing for 17 years. She was the best host on the Carter County Mountain Road. The women who stayed with her felt safe. I want to know where you are sitting when you hear what safe meant at the Doe River crossing inn. The specific context of women's travel on the mountain roads of Carter County in the 1890s is worth establishing before reaching the Moody Inn, because it shapes everything about why the inn's reputation was what it was, and why the pattern operated as long as it did. A woman traveling alone on the Carter County Mountain Road in the 1890s was a woman who was navigating a set of social and practical conditions that were quite specific to that period and that geography. The road through the Doe River Gap was not a formal public conveyance route. There were no scheduled coaches or trains serving the gap crossing in the 1890s. A woman using the road was traveling by her own means, a borrowed horse, a walking route, sometimes in company and sometimes not, and she was traveling for reasons that were frequently private in ways that the social conventions of the period discouraged discussing openly. A woman visiting family in circumstances of family difficulty. A woman moving between one life situation and another. A woman whose travel was not announced in advance or monitored closely after the fact. The mountain road through the gap served a specific category of personal travel that was distinct from the commercial travel of merchants and drovers, and Hester Moody had understood this since 1881 and had built an inn that served that category of traveler with a precision that no other stopping place on the route could match, because no other innkeeper on the route had Moody's specific skill for reading what a woman traveling under those conditions actually needed. Carter County, Tennessee in the 1890s was a county in the upper part of the Watauga River drainage, mountain terrain, with the particular road geography of a county that sat at the transition between the Tennessee mountain valleys and the Blue Ridge front. The road through the Doe River Gap was the primary route connecting Elizabethton and the Carter County Valley to the Avery County communities in North Carolina and to the trade and travel that moved between the two states through that corridor. It was a road that saw a specific kind of traveler, not primarily the commercial traffic of merchants and drovers, though they used it too, but the personal travel of people making the journey between family on one side of the line and family on the other. Women visiting relatives, women going to or from situations in the mountain towns, women whose travel was private in the way that personal travel tends to be private when the person traveling is moving between one chapter of their life and the next. Hester Moody had understood this since 1881. She had located her inn at the Gap Crossing specifically because of it. She had built a reputation as a woman's inn, not exclusively, but notably, because her instinct for the circumstances of her female guests and her skill at making those circumstances feel manageable within the walls of her establishment had produced a word-of-mouth recommendation network that brought women travelers to the Doe River crossing specifically, rather than to any of the Other stopping places on the road, she was known, she was trusted, and the trust was real, in the specific and important sense that the inn was genuinely what it appeared to be. Warm, safe, competent, and Hester Moody was genuinely what she appeared to be, at least in the initial presentation. The circuit court proceeding of November 1898 was not brought by any traveler who had stopped at the Doe River Crossing Inn and lived to describe what had happened there. It was brought by a family in Avery County, North Carolina, whose daughter, a woman named Ora Tilson, 26 years old, traveling from Elizabethton to her parents' home in Newland, had stopped at the inn in September 1898 and had arrived at her parents' home 2 weeks later than expected in a condition her mother described to the Carter County Sheriff as not herself and unable or unwilling to account for the 2 weeks. The mother had come to Elizabethton herself to make the complaint, and she had found in her inquiries among the women of the town 3 other families who had had daughters or sisters stop at the Doe River crossing and arrive at their destinations late in states that their families found difficult to characterize and more difficult to ask about directly. 4 women, 4 delayed arrivals, 4 families whose questions had been answered with silence or partial accounts that did not satisfy. The circuit court proceeding lasted 8 days. It heard testimony from the 4 affected families, from Hester Moody herself, from 2 women who had traveled the Doe River Road without stopping at the Moody Inn, and who provided context for what the normal road conditions and stopping patterns looked like, and from 3 witnesses who had worked at or around the inn in various capacities and who provided testimony about its operations that formed the factual foundation of the sealed exhibit bundle. The 4 affected families who came forward in the 1898 proceeding were not the full scope of what the investigation identified. The 8 days of testimony included, as part of the factual foundation, an accounting of women who had traveled the Doe River Road and stopped at the Moody Inn in the preceding 5 years, and whose arrivals at their destinations had been noted as delayed by their families or their waiting contacts. The district attorney's inquiry identified 14 such women in the 5-year period, of whom the 4 families who brought the complaint were the ones prepared to give formal testimony. The other 10 had not come forward and, by the district attorney's assessment in his summary to the court, were unlikely to come forward because coming forward would require them to describe the circumstances of their original travel to the inn, and those circumstances were ones they had decided to keep private. This is the self-protecting mechanism of the sealed exhibits, the same mechanism that protected the inn's operation for 17 years and that the sealing notation cites as its reason for existing. The women whose circumstances were exploited at the Doe River crossing were the same women whose privacy the sealed exhibits were designed to protect. The protection was genuine. It was also, in a specific and uncomfortable way, the continuation of the same privacy that had made the inn's operation possible in the first place. What the open testimony established, the portion of the record that is accessible in the Carter County Circuit Court records in Elizabethton, was this: Hester Moody had, over 17 years of innkeeping at the Doe River crossing, built a practice of identifying female guests who were traveling in circumstances of vulnerability, women in difficult transitions, women whose departures and arrivals were not being closely monitored, women who needed what the inn genuinely provided, and using those circumstances to extend the guest's stay beyond what the guest had planned by means that the open testimony described in general terms and the sealed exhibits addressed with specificity. The extended stays were not compelled in any simple physical sense. The open testimony was consistent about this. The women who had stayed longer than planned at the Doe River Crossing Inn did not describe being prevented from leaving. They described being offered things: care, counsel, assistance with difficulties they were traveling with, that made leaving feel less urgent than it had felt when they arrived, and that made it progressively less urgent as the days passed. Some of them could not fully account for the interval when they arrived at their destinations. Some of them could account for it, but had decided not to share the account. Some of them, by the time of the 1898 proceeding, had moved to destinations that were not the ones they had been traveling toward when they stopped at the Doe River crossing. The sealed exhibits address what was behind the extended stays. The Carter County Circuit Court records in Elizabethton contain the sealed exhibit bundle with a notation indicating that it was sealed at the request of the district attorney in 1899 on the grounds that the women whose circumstances were documented in the exhibits had not consented to those circumstances being made public. The notation further states that the sealing was intended to protect the dignity and privacy of the affected women. The notation has been on the folder since 1899. It is still on the folder. The exhibits are still sealed. What can be established from the open record is that Hester Moody's method was different in character from the methods documented in the other, in-keeping cases in this series. Ezra Dill's operation was explicitly violent in its outcomes. Men who stopped at his Big Sandy Crossing did not leave. The Denton family's operation was a leverage and information extraction system built on repeat customers and geographic control. Hester Moody's operation was neither of these. It was a manipulation of trust, specifically of the trust that women in vulnerable travel circumstances placed in the warmth and competence of a woman who appeared to understand what they needed. The manipulation used the real quality of what the inn provided, the genuine safety, the genuine warmth, the genuine competence, as the instrument of something that the district attorney and the circuit court judge were careful to address in terms that did not fully name what it was, even in the sealed exhibits, because naming it fully would have required the court to describe what had happened to the women whose privacy the sealing was designed to protect. The circuit court proceeding established one more element of the Moody operation that the open testimony addressed and that the sealed exhibits apparently document in full: the financial structure, the charge of obtaining money by false pretenses. The charge that Moody was actually convicted on was connected to documented financial transactions between the inn and specific guests in connection with their extended stays. What those transactions looked like in practice, what Moody was charging for, what she represented she was providing, and what the women who paid understood they were paying for, is addressed in the sealed exhibit's description of the specific instances. The open testimony described the financial dimension in terms that were deliberately oblique, and the circuit court record's accessible pages reflect that obliqueness. What can be established from the open testimony is that the transactions were not simple overcharges for room and board, and that they were not straightforward extortion. They were something in between those two things, payments connected to the specific circumstances of the guest stays that the guests made voluntarily, in the sense that they were not physically coerced, and that the inn's management of those circumstances made feel natural and appropriate in the moment, and that looked different in retrospect when the guests had put distance between themselves and the Doe River crossing and could assess what they had given and what they had received. Hester Moody was convicted on a charge of obtaining money by false pretenses relating to documented financial transactions connected to the extended stays of specific guests. She was sentenced to 3 years in the Tennessee State Penitentiary at Nashville. She served 2. She was released in 1901 and returned to Carter County. She does not appear in the record as having operated another inn or any similar establishment. She died in Elizabethton in 1911 at the age of 73. Her obituary in the Elizabethton newspaper describes her as a longtime Carter County resident who had operated a boarding house in her earlier years. The word inn does not appear. The Doe River crossing does not appear. The 1898 proceeding does not appear. Today, the road through the Doe River Gap in Carter County is a state highway, Tennessee Route 19E, which follows the old mountain road through the gap toward Avery County. The inn building was demolished long ago. The site of the Doe River crossing, where Hester Moody operated for 17 years, is now a turnoff on a mountain highway that carries traffic between the Tennessee Valley towns and the North Carolina border without any acknowledgement of what stopped at the river there from 1881 to 1898. The Carter County Circuit Court records in Elizabethton hold the 8 days of testimony and the sealed exhibit bundle. The district attorney's original sealing notation cited the privacy and dignity of the affected women. The women are long gone. The privacy that needed protecting has been protected for 125 years. Here is the question that Hester Moody leaves behind, and it is about the specific nature of what she built rather than its outcome. She used warmth and competence and the specific understanding of a woman in vulnerable circumstances as the mechanism of an operation that extended those circumstances rather than resolving them. The warmth was real, the competence was real, the understanding was real. What was not real was the use she made of them, the gap between what the inn appeared to be and what the inn was, in the specific instances documented in the sealed exhibits, was a gap that operated through the manipulation of genuine things rather than through the presentation of false ones. She did not pretend to be warm. She was warm. She did not pretend to understand what her guests needed. She did understand. The manipulation what she did with the warmth and the understanding, not in the warmth and the understanding themselves, is that worse than operating through straightforward deception? The women who stayed longer than they planned at the Doe River Crossing Inn stayed because something real had been offered to them, and they had responded to it. They were not deceived about the quality of what they were receiving. They were deceived about the purpose for which it was being offered. Tell me in the comments whether you think that distinction matters between deception about the quality of what is being offered, and deception about the purpose for which it is being offered. Hester Moody offered something real. What she was offering it toward is in the sealed bundle. The bundle is in Elizabethton. The distinction is in the gap between those two facts, and the gap has been sealed since 1899. And tell me where the 14 women are in this account, because they are the center of it, and they are the least present in the documentary record. The 4 families who came forward had daughters and sisters. The 10 families who did not come forward had daughters and sisters. 14 women stopped at the Doe River Crossing Inn in a 5-year period and experienced whatever the sealed exhibits document. Some of them arrived late at their destinations. Some of them, by the district attorney's account, had moved to destinations different from their original ones. Their names are in the sealed exhibits. The sealed exhibits have been sealed since 1899 to protect their privacy and dignity. They are long gone. The privacy that needed protecting has been protected for 125 years, and the only document that contains their full account is the sealed bundle in the circuit court records in Elizabethton. Hester Moody understood what those women needed before they said it. She understood it because she was genuinely skilled at reading the specific circumstances of women traveling in vulnerable conditions on a mountain road in the 1890s. That skill was real. What she did with it was the thing the sealed exhibits document and the open record declines to fully name. The warmth was real. The skill was real. The use she made of both is in the sealed bundle. Tell me in the comments whether you think that distinction matters between deception about the quality of what is being offered and deception about the purpose for which it is being offered. Hester Moody offered something real. What she was offering it toward is in the sealed bundle. The bundle is in Elizabethton. The distinction is in the gap between those two facts, and the gap has been sealed since 1899. If these sealed exhibits and district attorney notations about dignity and privacy in the cases where the women's circumstances were protected by the same seal that protected the person who had exploited those circumstances are the reason you found this channel, subscribe and ring the bell. The records are in Elizabethton. The exhibits are sealed. The turnoff on Route 19E has no marker. The inn is gone. The warmth was real. Those two things have to be held together, and the sealed exhibits are in Elizabethton, and they have been sealed since 1899. And the women whose circumstances they describe have been dead for decades, and the sealing notation cites their privacy and dignity as the reason for the seal. That was a genuine reason in 1899. It may still be a genuine reason in 2024 if the women's descendants are living in Carter County and their family histories are still subject to the specific form of social consequence that the district attorney was protecting against. Or it may be that the reason for the seal has been protected by time and distance beyond the point where it still applies, and the restriction is maintained by the same administrative inertia that maintains so many restrictions in so many archives, not by active decision, but by the absence of anyone having decided otherwise. The sealed exhibits would tell us what Hester Moody did with the warmth. They would tell us what the 14 women the district attorney identified experienced at the Doe River Crossing Inn. They would tell us whether the two terms, warmth and exploitation, are as incompatible as we want them to be, or whether what happened at the Doe River Crossing was in some specific and uncomfortable way, both at once. The inn is gone. The warmth was real. The exhibits are in the circuit court records in Elizabethton, in the building that has held them since 1899, sealed with a notation that cites the dignity and privacy of women who have been gone for generations.